Thank you very much. What a beautiful evening we have in Harlem. And we can thank, I'm not sure if I should thank God or Congressman Rangel, but it's sometimes hard to know. I do want to acknowledge the Dean, Congressman Charles Rangel, and I'm going to follow up on his discussion of why we are kicking off the commemoration of the March on Washington here tonight. Hazel Dukes, Mark Morial, thank you for that generous introduction. And we have a lot of heroes here tonight who are going to speak to you. I know that several public officials were here. Councilmember Inez Dickens is still with us. Inez. Councilmember Robert Jackson. I see State Senator Adriano Espaillat. And Idanis Rodriguez, the councilman, and Gabriela Rosa, the assembly member, were here. And also our great borough president, Scott Stringer, stopped by, but he's kind of busy. So he had to get up to the Bronx, but we wish Scott well. And listen, I am delighted to be here with you tonight. And we have a terrific panel that is going to speak after me. This is, though, a program about justice. And I like Mark's formulation of my job. You will be hearing from a terrific group of panelists, and including Lucia Gomez, Arva Rice, Damon Hewitt, and Tamika Mallory later on. And this will be led by the head of my Civil Rights Bureau, Kristen Clark. And also, I'd like to recognize, who's going to help move the show along, the head of our Harlem office upstairs, Guy Mitchell, Assistant AG in charge of the office here. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to raise your voices. It is time to remember what happened here 50 years ago, because as Congressman Rangel mentioned, the March on Washington was actually organized, and as Hazel Muse mentioned, in a brownstone that Bayard Rustin had rented on 130th Street in Lenox. There was a lot of the meetings going on there. They had these great young people, but the leadership, the visionary leadership of those who organized the march has to be honored this week, and it has to serve as a reminder to us of why we have to raise our voices once again. So I am honored to be here as your lawyer, as the top legal officer of the state of New York, the top justice officer of the state of New York. And let's remember, 50 years ago, folks went down to Washington. They did not know this was going to be, they didn't know they were going to hear one of the great speeches of all time. They didn't know there were going to be hundreds of thousands of people there. But the folks went down there, they had the privilege of hearing Dr. King proclaim dignity and respect for every human being. And ladies and gentlemen, that tremendous speech and some other great speeches are what most people think about when they think about Dr. King today. They remember his great successes in the fight for civil rights. But people sometimes forget what went before, the groundwork that made those successes possible. And before he became a legend, Dr. King was in fact denounced and persecuted. He was, a lot of people don't like it when you speak truth to power and when you criticize inequality and oppression by the powerful. And he was criticized. He was investigated by the FBI. He was smeared by rumor and innuendo to discredit both him and his message. But ladies and gentlemen, as something of a student of legal history in America, I have to tell you that when it was inevitable that when the media focused on Dr. King after his death, that they realized that his, in fact, was a quintessentially American mission and a quintessentially American message. An expression of hope that was in a direct line from the words of Thomas Jefferson, who framed the project, the work in progress that is the United States of America, the first nation in the world without king aristocracy, designed to evolve as our Constitution uniquely was designed to evolve. Jefferson wrote, We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, we all know, this is the genius of America, ladies and gentlemen, we all know this was not true when Thomas Jefferson wrote those words, right? Women are not even in here. Slavery was widespread. Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. The facts on the ground, as we say, did not support this. But you want to make conservatives crazy, you tell them, oh, the Declaration of Independence isn't true. And in this I have to sort of agree with the conservatives. The idea was not that we had equality, because women couldn't own property in most places. They couldn't vote anywhere. Jews and Muslims and other non-Christians couldn't vote. They had labored under all these discriminatory laws. But the point of this great project was to set up something that happened that has never happened before. A country that was born in the spirit of transformation and revolution challenged every generation since then to make those words ever more true. And from the abolitionist movement to the women's suffrage movement to the labor movement to the civil rights movement that we honor and celebrate tonight. And I have to say, as a public official, not one of these movements was led by a public official. It all started with activists or agitators like Dr. King, who held America to that promise of greater justice and ever greater equality. And elected officials will show up once you get the ball rolling. Lyndon Johnson was there to sign the Civil Rights Act in 1964. You wouldn't find Lyndon Johnson near the Civil Rights Movement in 1934, I tell you that. But generation after generation have risen to this challenge, and ladies and gentlemen, it is now on us to face the challenge today of making the words of the Declaration of Independence ever more true. And I, as your lawyer, have an obligation to be honest with you. And I'm going to be very candid here, because I know everyone here can keep a secret. But this is not a secret, and it should not be a secret. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to raise our voices again. In many ways, this aspiration for equality and justice, and those aspirations reached their peak not too long after Dr. King's death. Over the last 30 years, a new, more powerful conservative movement, led by activists, as all movements are started by activists, has tried to roll back progress. And listen, I am blessed to be your Attorney General. I am in the justice business, and I believe that those of us in the justice business in the United States are compelled to raise the issue of equal justice under law whenever we have the opportunity to do so. In my office, we work every day to bring to life that radical American principle of equal justice under law. So it is very important to have an honest relationship with your lawyer. If you find yourself lying to your lawyer, you have a problem. Don't lie to your doctors either. But I am your lawyer, and I have a few points I want to make in candor and in celebration and in paying our respects to Dr. King the best way we can, which is to be truthful and to be strong. Those of us responsible with building and sustaining the movement he led have not been getting the job done. Over the last 30 years, the conservatives who want to take back America, now I am not sure how far back they want to take us. I thought it was the 50s. Now I think they're going for the 1880s sometimes. But they have built a powerful movement, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, Congressman Rangel, everyone goes to Washington these days should get combat pay, right? I mean, this is a bad scene down there. And in truth, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we're kind of in a way closer to 1933 than to 1963. So as a student of the law, let me speak to you of two of my heroes as lawyers. In 1933, Charles Hamilton Houston and his young student Thurgood Marshall were working in the NAACP office down on Lower Fifth Avenue to design a plan for transformational change. And ladies and gentlemen, I feel in a way like we are facing the same challenges in a way that they faced in 1933. We're not at 63 yet. We're not at the point where decades of building and strengthening the civil rights movement was about to come to fruition. So let's honestly address the challenges that our generation faces. As in 1933, we face a series of bad Supreme Court decisions that are no less than a radical reinterpretation of our Constitution. So my second point is this: as your lawyer, I have to advise you that just because the Supreme Court issues an opinion, we do not have to agree that it is good law. Plessy v. Ferguson was the law of the land for almost 60 years, legalizing segregation. And it took the long-term vision of Charles Houston, who developed the plan, and he wrote a memo saying, here's how we overturn Plessy v. Ferguson, back in the 30s, and his student, Thurgood Marshall, argued before the Supreme Court in Brown v. Board of Education and overturned Plessy v. Ferguson. So, again, as your lawyer, we have to follow the law, but we do not have to agree with the law, and we can work to change the law. That is the American way. And many of you know of the Supreme Court's horrendous decision in 2010 in Citizens United, holding that the wealthy can spend as much as they want to buy elections. That is bad law, ladies and gentlemen. It completely undercuts the principle of one person, one vote. So we have to follow the law, but I assure you, there are lawyers all over America, and I am one of them, who have committed to working to reverse it. It's not going to take us 50 years like it did with Plessy v. Ferguson. And my third point is in the spirit of honoring Dr. King and honoring those who organized and marched, and calling on you to raise your voices again and to march again. Little unusual talk from a law enforcement officer, but this is what comes from my heart, ladies and gentlemen. There's been a lot of talk, especially in the context of the Trayvon Martin case and some other matters, about the need to respect the American system of justice, respect juries, respect the system of justice. I am a true believer in the American system of justice. I'm proud to be a lawyer. I'm proud to be an American lawyer. I'm proud to be your Attorney General. But what a lot of folks don't seem to understand is that after the Trayvon Martin verdict, millions of Americans felt that the American justice system was not respecting them. And people feel as though we are now disrespected by our own justice system far too often. The stand your ground laws that say it's okay to shoot someone rather than walk away from a fight, that have gotten national notoriety, and a lot of other bad laws on guns, let me be honest with you, come from a Supreme Court, another bad Supreme Court decision, 2008 decision in the District of Columbia versus Heller, that reversed over 100 years of precedent. And again, a radical reinterpretation of the Second Amendment. These laws and the enforcement of these laws disrespect all of us. And I want you to know that Jackie Roe Adams, who beautifully sang the national anthem for us, she's lost 2 children to gun violence. And she's here with us, she is speaking, she is singing, she formed Harlem Mothers Save. If she can be here, you can be here. If she can raise her voice, we can all raise our voices. There's no community that has supported our work in New York on guns more than this community, I will tell you that today. And in New York, we have gone a different way. We have passed the strongest gun laws in the country with the help of some of the folks on this stage. And I've got a deal with every gun show operator in the state. My people from my office are in our gun shows. We are the only state in the country where you cannot get out of a gun show without a background check. And the gun show operators like doing background checks. And the rank and file of the NRA is with us too. They are parents, they are regular people. We have to reach across this divide, and we can do something to end the plague of gun violence in our country. But the efforts we've been making are not enough, because the Supreme Court has authorized state governments to treat us all with disrespect. That is unacceptable. Stand your ground laws encourage violence and disrespect. And speaking of disrespect, let me talk a bit about my work that Mark referred to with the big banks, or really on the big banks. Look, millions of Americans felt disrespected, and rightly so, when a small group of large institutions blew up the American economy. Ladies and gentlemen, this was not because of a tsunami or a hurricane or a natural disaster. This is a man-made catastrophe that cost us $7.4 trillion in home equity, and then no one was held accountable. Well, that wasn't okay with me, so I held out to make sure that we launched a national investigation, and sure enough, the President, in his State of the Union address in 2012, made me the co-chair of a national task force. You may have seen Attorney General Holder's remarks today that sent shivers down the backs of those in the suites of power, saying, we're not done with you yet. Do not think that the passage of time means you are off the hook. And he, Attorney General Holder, and his office and my office and people all across the country are going to insist that there is accountability. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I can do this within the legal system, but believe me, we get from our elected officials what we make them give us, so we need you also out there to make sure we get justice. Too big to fail and too big to jail is not only anti-American, it is anti-capitalist, right? How disrespectful is this? The folks, some of these crazy folks down in Washington, and Congressman, I apologize if this is making your head hurt for me to remind you about them on this beautiful evening back home, but every small business you see here is allowed to fail. But then we're told these big banks are not allowed to fail? That's not equal justice under law, and we will not stand for it, ladies and gentlemen. And, you know, I could go through the work of my office, but it all comes down to this. In the area of labor law, there are people who refuse to respect our minimum wage and prevailing wage laws, who cheat workers out of their own money. We have busted people. We are bringing more criminal cases than our Labor Bureau of the Attorney General's office has ever brought against people who were in car washes paying people $4 an hour. We're looking at the fast food industry and the fast food workers. If the fast food workers, the poorest of the working poor, can raise their voices, there is no excuse for any of us who are doing better to remain silent. And we're looking at large employers and the payroll cards they give out instead of paychecks these days that are kind of like script at the company store. And we know some of them charge workers when they check their balance, and some of them charge workers when they want to get money. We want to make sure that no one is above the law and that the working men and women of this country are treated with respect no matter how modest their work or their means. And ladies and gentlemen, how sad is it that people feel disrespected and are disrespected when they try to exercise their right to vote? This is the bedrock of America. And I am proud of the fact that my office led a multi-state effort and wrote an amicus brief to the Supreme Court in an effort to stop the attack on the Voting Rights Act. And ladies and gentlemen, we lost. We lost. The Supreme Court that in Dr. King's time took courageous stands for justice and equality shamefully struck down the law that he championed and gutted the Voting Rights Act. Now, in places with long history of discrimination, they're trying to turn back the clock with voter ID laws that will keep eligible voters from exercising their rights. That is unacceptable disrespect. And ladies and gentlemen, I have a very simple principle I would urge on you for this particular area of law. Any law that makes it easier for people who are eligible to vote to register and vote is a good law. Any law that makes it harder for people to register and vote is a bad law. So, average Americans are feeling themselves treated with disrespect by their government, by their justice system. And in closing, let me just mention more explicitly, the most taboo subject now is no longer race or sexual orientation. Somehow or other, the most taboo subject seems to be economic inequality. Now, I don't know how that happened or when that happened, because I thought the whole point for the United States was that we were all about some level of economic equality. We don't guarantee success, but every child deserves a fair shot. Everyone must do their fair share, and everyone has to play by the same set of rules. That is what America is about. Now, from the 1930s, when my heroes were down on Fifth Avenue crafting the civil rights movement, to the 1970s, we had what the economists call the Great Compression. We had a compression of the gap between rich and poor. We were the nation, and we always had been, since the Industrial Revolution, the industrial country with the most equitable distribution of wealth. And then the turn back the clock crowd came back in, and from Reagan to Gingrich to Bush, The gap widened, and we are now the industrial democracy with the most inequitable distribution of wealth in the world. Today's minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. In 1963, when Dr. King gave his speech, he was fighting for a minimum wage in '63 that would be worth $13 an hour today. Come on. It is time for you to raise your voices. It is time for us to raise our voices. And ladies and gentlemen, this is not a race-neutral economic gap. Black Americans still are in poverty at a rate 3 times that of white Americans. The foreclosure crisis hit the black community harder than any other community. Blacks and Latinos were being foreclosed on over the last 4 years, twice the rate of white homeowners. And through the recovery, this slow recovery we're in, ladies and gentlemen, just to frame up the work before us, 93% of the wealth created since the crash has gone to the top 1%. 93% of the wealth created has gone to the top 1%. These are the results of the net effect of the laws that are being put into effect by elected officials, but these elected officials are following the force of a movement that demands more and more and more from them. And you, ladies and gentlemen, are here tonight to commemorate and celebrate and reanimate a movement on the other side that demands more and more from our elected officials and demands that we get back to the fundamental mission of America. We can fix this, we must fix this, because the trajectory of American history is not from Andrew Mellon in the 1920s to David Stockman to Newt Gingrich to George Bush. It is from Jefferson to Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman to A. Philip Randolph and Walter Reuther to Charles Houston and Thurgood Marshall to Dr. King and to you, to us today. So let us honor those who have gone before. Let us celebrate the culmination of the great movement building of that era, and let us recommit to taking our part in this quintessential American mission of greater justice and greater equality with each generation. I thank you for being here, and I know that we will be here together again. We are here with leaders of great organizations. We are here with some of the best public officials you can find. Once again, it all comes back to you. You can't beat a movement with a lawsuit. You can only beat a movement with another movement. Are you ready to raise your voices? Let's do this together. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.